If we had a planet full of the most beautiful, every single building was a work of art, but there were no humans here, like what's the point? Like the
Mhm.
the goal of architecture is to serve humanity.
Hello! Welcome to The Healing Artist. I'm your host, Frida, and friends, today we are joined by Taylor Stewart. He is the creator of conscious home design. Everyone understands the mind-body connection these days. However, Taylor expands on this and helps people understand how to put the mind-body environment connection to work for them and to support them more fully. Understanding the subtle ways our homes influence us is an essential skill in life. Just like knowing how to cook a well-balanced meal, it really makes a difference, especially over time. Taylor, welcome to The Healing Artist. I'm so happy to have you with us.
Hi, Frida. Good to be here. Thanks for touching on that point about the mind-body environment connection and having that be, an essential life skill. Just like knowing how to dress for the weather or prepare a well-balanced, nutritious meal. It really serves us over time, as we go through life.
I absolutely agree with that. And it's something that I would think almost comes as an afterthought, perhaps, to many of us just growing up middle class. There's like a lot of not choices that we have until the
Sure.
point when we're able to actually make some choices for ourselves.
Yeah. So that's largely true. Because most people, the fact of the matter is most people won't actually ever hire an architect in their life. Most people are just going to do the best they can with whatever walls they have. Um, and so the idea of talking to an architect or hiring an architect just seems sort of outside of their, um, reality, or it's not a goal per se. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that there aren't things that a person can do with the walls they have that would, you know, just support them a little bit better, sort of fine tune your environment, because we all know about the mind body connection. I mean, that's real.
Mhm.
That's well documented. Um, Also documented, but less understood by most people, is the mind body environment connection. But it's still there, like Winston Churchill said, we shape our buildings and thereafter they shape us. And so we want to shape them in a way that is going to be, to our advantage. And so we can put that, outer, environment to work for us. So we're removing friction and creating flow, and it helps lift us into, it's so much easier actually to reach our goals when our environment is supportive of the choices we're trying to make. So we're not
Mm.
having to overcome those friction points, but we can just, it actually guides us into our future. So to the degree that you can
Yeah.
shape your environment, you can shape your destiny.
I love even just thinking about this because it's just our world around us. It's so almost subconscious. We're in a whole bunch of boxes and we're
That's right.
confined within and like depending on just even
Sure.
maybe adding some windows in certain places, we would be opening up our lives even some more.
Sure, sure. I mean, the our bodies, we didn't evolve in homes, in architecture, So architecture, no matter how beautiful you make it, it's still from the perspective of the instinctual, and subconscious, mind and the physical organism, it's still a foreign environment. And
Mm.
so, bringing nature into the home in the form of green growing things, plants. In fact, even if they're artificial plants, you won't get the air quality boost and the humidity support with artificial plants, but it sends a visual cue to the subconscious mind that, okay, I'm in my natural habitat, and so if you're trying to reduce, or increase that sense of when you come home, because home is your sanctuary, right? And
Yeah.
compared to the chaos and the um uh whatever, all the energy that's happening outside, in the world, coming into your home, it is a sanctuary. It's a safe space, by contrast, yes, but it's still a foreign environment, from the perspective of the body. And so it will never feel as walking through a forest path, for example, or
Mm-hmm.
walking along the beach. Those kind of settings and environments are going to get us more quickly to our deepest sense of calm.
Yeah.
Yes. And so because we're spending so much of our lives in our homes, we spend half of our lives in our homes.
Well,
And for people
especially
that
from
are
the pandemic on, right?
yeah, but
Yeah.
even before that was
Yeah.
half our life. For people that are working from home,
Yeah.
sort of that's like 90% of your life is spent in the home. And so, and a lot of people are living in urban or suburban areas where it's not just easy access to pure naturescapes.
Hmm.
You're seeing manicured lawns and some trees and things like that, which is good, but it's still, interrupted by man-made creations, roads, sidewalks, telephone poles, signs, cars, houses. And even if you live in a beautiful neighborhood, seeing those things, it doesn't have the same level of impact as just a pure naturescape. So bringing, plants into the home, bringing natural materials like wood, where you can see the wood grain, or stone, sort of, we call them sort of fractals, or sort of these images of nature, patterns of nature,
Okay.
um, sort of biophilic. And so that's going to just be a very simple thing that anyone can do, even if you're living in an apartment that you rent, and you've got no plans. You're not even going to repaint. You just the minorest redecorating that you're going to do is change some things around to get a better, um, just a better sense of peace. So bringing nature in, that's, one thing that you can do. There's so many different other pieces.
Well, I'm just wondering, how did you arrive at this? How did you discover it
Yeah.
through your career or come here?
Architects, like doctors and attorneys, are specialized, in
Hmm.
their areas of interest and their practice. It's the field is quite broad. And so I'm someone who's interested in personal development, self-improvement,
I
feeling like I'm
see.
connected to the rhythm of life, the flow and harmony of the, of what's going on out there. The universe is alive, right?
Yes.
And so I want to feel like I'm connected to that, and I'm surfing with that, if that, surfing through life.
Yes.
And rather than, clumsily, just being a bumble.
Yes. You're in the flow.
Exactly. And so everyone's out there waving this flag. Hey, live your best life, live your best life, live happily ever after. And all of our stories from, that we grow up with are talk about happily ever after. And the adventure leads up to that. And happily ever after is always the end of the story. But actually, from an architect's perspective, that's the beginning of the story.
Right.
We build our lives around what we love, and we should build our homes around our lives so that, everything is interconnected. And so for me as an architect, I'm thinking, we're gonna work on your home. That's the first day of the rest of your life.
Okay,
And I'm
cool.
thinking about what's that journey going to look like.
Hmm.
And I'm having a conversation with you. Hey, what do you want for your future? What are you trying to create? What kind of lifestyle do you want to live? What kind of person do you want to become? What feeds you? What makes you unique? Is there a way to, rather than just squeezing yourself into any old box, is there a way that we can make that box, can we take some custom measurements of you, of your life, and then build it to that? We all know that we're more than just bodies, and you can give the body shelter, even beautiful shelter, but that's no proof or guarantee of happily ever after. That's
Yeah.
you can, if you give, the basic program of a house or is kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, hangout space, at least since 100 years ago, since it became standard to have, electricity and heat and uh, plumbing and all those things, right? So the modern kitchen, so for the past 100 years, that's it, kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, hangout space. And they call that a house or a home.
Hmm.
In the past, 25 years, because we've now invented high-speed internet, maybe we have the home office added to that
Right.
sort of program, right? But if you looked at, 1990, very few people worked from home
Hmm.
compared to, 2020. And I'm not talking about the pandemic, pre sort of right
Sure.
up until when everyone had to be at home, before the lockdown. If you looked at 1990 to 2020, January of 2020, the percentage of people that were working home over those 30 years grew a lot. I don't have the exact data, but it's
Sure.
very, it grew a lot specifically because of high speed internet.
Hmm.
And so post pandemic, obviously that number is even higher. Even with people going back to work, it's still so much higher than it was before because it changed what was, possible and acceptable.
So how does the conscious home design come in? What is your sort of whole
Yeah.
theory that you bring to the table with this?
So recognizing that we're more than just bodies that
Mhm.
need
We're a soul
shelter,
having a human experience.
we have higher needs.
Yeah.
Maslow, the hierarchy of human needs pyramid from Abraham Maslow.
Hmm.
We have needs for love and belonging. We have
Hmm.
needs for creative expression. We have needs for personal growth and self-improvement and development. We all want to feel like we have room to grow. That no one wants to be like, oh, I know everything. I've hit the end. There's everything to know. I've learned it all. It's like that's boring. People want to always feel like, especially if they're passionate about something. That it people want ever new. We always want to be able to learn a little bit more, stretch a little bit.
Hmm.
When people plateau, that's a people like either say, okay, well, I either need to quit and do something else where I can feel some growth curve, or I really love this thing. I need to knuckle down and discipline it and hit that next level and break through. People have an inherent need to grow.
Hmm.
And
Okay.
so we will always be looking for opportunities to stretch our possibilities and because there's the spirit inside of us is limitless. And so when faced with the limiting reality of a three-dimensional world, body and these things, it's incongruous to
Hmm.
who we are. And so we're always stretching and reaching for to break limitations. And it's too much, so we have to economize. We have habits, and we go through the motions, we have routines and stuff. And so to be efficient, we can't be at 100% all the time. And
Hmm.
so that's the time where the environment gets its say in how things end up for us.
So how does the
Be,
environment, how can it support us in our activities and growth and relaxation
so
or?
t touching on the, back to Maslow's in creative needs, expression, creative expression needs, self-improvement needs, love and belonging needs. I start to ask questions. Okay, what would a house look like? What would a home look like if we intentionally created opportunity for our higher needs, not just our basic physical needs? And so, um, when we dedicate space to an activity, it gives us the opportunity to actually do that thing. Like if you don't have, if you say, hey, I have a goal, this is a very simple, basic one to just to illustrate the point. If you say, I have a goal of preparing three fresh, nutrient dense healthy meals per day. But my kitchen is a mini fridge and a microwave,
Right.
like a college dorm room situation. That's really difficult.
Hmm.
It's going to be achieving that goal is going to take a lot of really focused work and attention. It's going to take a big chunk of your willpower. We have limited willpower, to spend every day,
Right.
limited energy, right? And it's like, okay, what battle am I going to face,
Hmm.
on this? And so if that's not a high priority that you're willing to dedicate a lot of effort to achieving, then the chances of your being successful in that goal are low.
Hmm.
And so everyone says it takes time and effort to become accomplished at something.
Yes. Hmm.
Practice makes perfect, right? That's common sense. but it also takes space. That's the missing piece of that formula.
For sure.
If
Yeah.
you don't have space to do your thing, then you're swimming upstream. You're climbing uphill. It's a
Yeah.
difficult road.
Yeah, I always feel
So
like you can tell a lot about someone and what they're going through and what they're up to when you go into their home and see how they have it laid out and what they prioritize and where their stuff is. So, do you actually go to
definitely.
people's homes and see what they've got going on before you plan a new one with them, or?
Um, Not always.
Hmm.
If they want to share, what's working and what's not working about their existing space, um, photos are usually enough.
Yeah.
Um, and not even always that.
Hmm.
Someone can they can they can just work with me on onboarding, answering the questions, and I can get a sense of where they want to go. And I don't need to see where they've been. They just need to tell me what the future they want to create.
Yeah, this
So
is super random. I'm just going to share it and see what you have to say
sure.
about this. But like, I have a set of friends who did extremely well from tech, and they went and bought their $2,500,000 dream home that has all of these things. They have two kiddos, and like, I went and spent a month there to watch their dog when they were traveling and doing stuff. And there is not a single thing in that home that is built for, and they've done tons of renovations and are continuing to do more for them, for the couple. Absolutely
Yeah.
every single thing in that home is dedicated to those two children. Even the level of where the artwork is hung on the walls is low so that the kids can see it, to their
Okay.
gorgeous big jet bathtub with all of this sort of amazing stuff. And it's got kids' toys next to it. And kiddo bubble bath and stuff. Like there's nothing in there that is a sacred space for them to be. I look at that and I'm like, how do you even have that? Or how are you even lovers? How do you have an existence
Interesting.
together? Right? So like what would you so you would see that and then it's like, would you are you also helping people create and walk towards what they might not even know
Yeah,
that they need?
that's really good, Frida. Sometimes if they're not paying attention to these things, it doesn't mean that they're not influencing them for good or for ill, right? And so, you can get so distracted by a busy life
Yeah, it's
that
that
you
one.
cannot notice that you cut X, Y, and Z out of your life, these things that actually feed you. And then 5 years can go by or 10 years can go by and you wake up and go, oh my God, I feel like I'm drowning, I'm starving, I'm suffocating. And it's because you've been neglecting this side of yourself because you didn't notice it because life was so busy and active that out of sight, out of mind. But now you're like, oh, suddenly it became like crisis. And so with conscious home design, what I'm trying to do is plan and be more sensitive and say, well, look, maybe you love to play the cello. And before you had these responsibilities of job and family, you used to play 2 hours a day. And now you only have 15 minutes, but 15 minutes still keeps the spark alive.
Yes.
And so rather than crisis and recovery, we can have a lot, transitions happen. That's a natural part of life. But
Hmm.
let's have them be let's have them be more gentle
Hmm.
when they come rather than so extreme and that kind of thing. So conscious home design is about, you know, well, it's just planning, I guess. Planning for the future so that, we give you every opportunity to live your best life. So, Seth Godin said, I think he said 10,000 hours. If you invest 10,000 hours, into a subject, learning about that, practicing that thing, studying it, then compared to the average, population, you're an expert.
Okay.
Um, Most people are not going to spend 10,000 hours of their life thinking about their home and how to design it and have it make it and have it work for them and have it integrate with their actual life, and thinking about, hey, what's best for me as an individual and how can I, grow and meet my goals and have my home support that. Most people, I don't think they're even making that connection.
Right.
I think most people don't understand that the home is one of the most powerful personal development tools we have available to
Ooh,
us. They haven't
yeah.
even made that association. They just think, hey, it's a home is where I'm going to hang out and hang my hat and relax and do my thing. If the more we, thoughtfully cultivate your home, then your life is going to be more abundant.
My husband and I are out in the Bay Area, and trying to find a place to live out here is
It's expensive
crazy. It is
and
cuckoo
crowded.
bananas. Oh man, yeah.
Yeah.
So like we were rejected from I don't even know how many bids we put in. I think we were like on our I think that we finally got our sixth.
Wow.
But
Yeah,
there's like a
yeah,
level of just like you just keep throwing like how much more over asking do you have to throw at this thing? But there was a
yeah.
level of can we live here? Like that always went into everything as opposed to is this right for us? Like and
Sure.
or it's like will we be able to win this one? But there were some things that I
Right.
saw going into properties that were just I learned that I loved a sunken living room and like that sort of whole
Okay. Yeah, sure. The conversation pit was
yeah.
big in the 70s. Hmm.
I think it's probably because of the age that I am growing up in the 1980s. That's what I was looking at on television. I think it really formed the
Yes.
aesthetic.
Right. Yes. When I go to someone's house, in the situation, like if I went to their house and was touring through to help them, um, either renovate or make some choices to realign it, to what they want to do, or if at some point it's time for them to, the kids are growing out and they don't need all that space and they want to downsize without downgrading. They still want to have a very quality home, but now they want it to be like maintenance free and not too big, so they don't have to clean it and all that kind of stuff, right? And they can free up some equity and chuck it somewhere else.
Mhm.
Um, you know, it's not my job to go in there and say you need this or that. That I'm not. I'm just looking at what's there, and without judgment, I'm just assessing what's there, and I'm noticing things. And I'll say, oh, okay, they've done this. Is that intentional or is that accidental? Was that haphazard? And
Mhm.
so I can just ask specific questions that can help bring things into clarity, into focus, because once we have focus, once we have clarity on something, we can then make a good choice. Do we want that? Do we want to keep that and preserve that? Do we want to enhance that and grow from that? Or do we want to get rid of that and adjust? And so if you're not sure what's what, it's hard to make um, good decisions, And
Yeah.
so that's the approach. Conscious home design is going to meet you where you are.
Mhm.
It's not an all or nothing proposition. Wherever you are, whoever you are, it's going to we'll start there
Yeah.
and say, okay, what's next? What's the next version of you look
Mhm.
like? Let's see if we can get there together. Let's work on fine tuning and setting your GPS coordinates. Because if you just say like best life or I want to live happily ever after, that's too broad and vague. We need to define that to be able to say, well, what would that look like? Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's conscious home design.
There's a
Yeah.
school out here in Richmond, California. It's a high school in a mostly Black and Latino community, and it was built in the 80s, 70s, or 80s, and it doesn't have a single window.
Oh my God.
Can you? I can't even imagine what it smells like in there. But like, it has
Oh,
not a single
wow.
window in the whole place, and it's just like talk about conscientious home design. It's just like, what are you telling those kids? Jeez Louise, why would you even want to go?
Yeah, it's brutal. So Georgetown University did a study where they changed um, the environment of where the students were. The curriculum was the same, teachers were the same, everything was the same, but the environment was
Yeah,
changed. And test scores went up 11% on
yeah,
average. The difference between a B minus and an A. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, okay, that's significant. And so when I hear that story about that school that it was built by well-intentioned but just ignorant,
ignorant.
this is what
It
I'm
seems
calling
like.
highly intentional but unconscious
Yeah.
architecture.
They wanted to say no distractions. They thought that distractions were the problem.
That would give them focus and that they would be able
Correct.
to just get in, but it's just so not the way the brain works.
So tell me about the book you wrote.
I always knew I'd write a book, even when I was in college. And the word, the phrase, the title of the book, Conscious Home Design, came out of a paper in college where I found that architects we're a pretty thoughtful bunch, and we always are looking to tie back our choices. Like, oh, I did this because of this. Like everything is justified, or at least there's nothing whimsical in architecture. We're very thoughtful and we're very intentional about the work we do. And if something is whimsical, then the reason behind it is we wanted something to be whimsical. we wanted something to be completely, free, but it has to be an intentional choice, right? So architects and architecture is highly intentional.
Mhm.
However, I found that it was so building centric and style forward. And and yes, architects want their creations to be useful, we but it was just so focused on buildings and structure and the materials and all the stuff that I found that people were getting left in the dark and were getting left behind. And it was like, well, people are having to squeeze themselves into that thing
Right.
rather than that thing being built around the people. And like if we had a planet full of the most beautiful, every single building was a work of art, but there were no humans here, like what's the point? Like the
Hmm.
the goal of architecture is to serve humanity, and so letting people live their best life, helping people live happily ever after, that's the highest calling of architecture. And so to me, architecture is more about people than buildings. In
Okay.
the
Yeah.
same way that a book is not about pages and ink, a book is about the experience a person's going to have reading that story.
Yeah.
And so a home is not about sticks and bricks. It's about the experience people will have living there. It doesn't matter where in the world it is, whether it's a cottage or a castle, whether it's on this continent or that continent, whether you're building it out of stone or wood, or whether it's conventional or alternative, whether it's eco-friendly or not. Conscious home design is it's going to, whatever your choices are, whatever your situation is, will work with that.
Hmm.
It doesn't say it specifically. You wouldn't drive down the street and look at a house and go, "Oh, that's conscious home design." It's invisible that way.
Right. Right.
It comes down to priorities. It's
Yeah.
if someone has, if there's budget limitations, then we need to find out, well, what's the low hanging fruit? What's really going to move the needle the most? And let's
Mm.
focus on those things. Let's
Yeah.
dedicate, these things, because that's what's really going to impact life the most.
Hmm. So, where could folks find your book to read it if they desired?
Um, you can order it through any bookstore. You just
Okay.
go to any bookstore and say, "Hey, can you get me a copy of Conscious Home Design?" Or online retailer,
Mhm.
Barnes and Noble or Amazon. You can also get it through my website, conscioushomedesign.com.
Okay.
On my site, there's also um, the audiobook version
Cool.
of it and the workbook as a companion that goes with it, which is about taking those ideas in the book and saying what that looked like for me. And so again, it's like asking those good questions, and you get to do some thoughtful exercises and say, okay, now I have now I've built out and defined better that wish list. And so if you bring that to any architect or builder or designer, or even a real estate agent, if you're looking to just buy a new home on the market and give them your list, now they have something to work with and they can save you. I mean, you're already 3 steps ahead of the average person who comes through that, you know, person's door.
It seems like a piece of the puzzle that I hadn't necessarily thought about. And it's interesting. I'm going to have to dissect this one, but it does seem like a piece of the holistic wellness puzzle that I didn't actually know that I had access to, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So look, I'm an architect. I need to stay in my lane, like I'm not a therapist, I'm not a
Yeah.
doctor. Architecture isn't medicine, but architecture needs to come into the 21st century. We architecture hasn't evolved in 100 years. You know, styles, sure, we paint gray instead of brown,
Right.
instead of green, as we move through the decades, the aesthetics have changed and some materials have changed and technology has changed, but the basic function of the home, kitchen,
Right.
bathroom, bedroom, hangout space, it's the same
Right.
as 100 years ago. But the school is a prime example of this. What the humanities have learned in the past 100 years is quantum leap.
Right.
And architecture, which is supposed to be supporting people, needs to take notes from the science of human excellence that all these other professions have broken ground on,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
start taking that data, and that's what I'm doing, and saying, okay, look, happily ever after, best life, we actually have better data to measure that now than we did 100 years ago.
Right.
We know so much more about the actual brain and how that works, and the association between the mind body connection, and we, whether it's the placebo effect or whether it's, visualization that, you can do that. NASA use it for astronauts or
Right.
sports, in the Olympics. I mean, it's like there's so much nutrition, there's so much knowledge that we have now that architects are slow or not even thinking about incorporating into their buildings,
Hmm.
into their
Yeah.
projects. It's like, air quality, water, hydration, staying hydrated. I see you've got your big bottle
Oh
there.
yeah,
It's
I
like
drink all that water every day.
that's right. The American Medical Association estimates 75% of Americans are chronically dehydrated, chronically,
Right.
right?
Right.
The body's very resilient. You can be acutely dehydrated and recover, but if you're chronically dehydrated, that's going to shorten your life expectancy.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. Yeah. And so it's like, well, what can I do to encourage people to stay hydrated architecturally? What can I do?
Yeah.
If you've got kids, hey, can I put a drinking fountain in there so you're not
Yeah.
making lots of glasses
Oh,
everywhere?
that's actually fun.
It's
That's a fun
fun,
idea. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right? It's fun, to do that, and you don't have to dirty a cup, and so you remove some friction from that, but if the water tastes bad, if it smells like chlorine or
Right.
whatever, then you're not going to do that. And so, okay, what kind of filtration are we going to need? Test your water. Is it from a well? Is it from the city,
Right.
municipal water? Whatever it is, let's make sure that the water tastes good so that you will drink it,
Yeah.
and so that you're not drinking Diet Coke all the time, or whatever. Whatever it is people are drinking, that's killing them. So, architecturally, I'm thinking about scientific first principles of, air. You can't go more than 7 minutes without air, 7 days without water, 7 weeks without food. So these are high priorities. How can we increase air quality? How can we increase hydration and have a kitchen that supports nutritious meal
Hmm.
preparation?
Yeah. No, this all makes sense. I think it's a neat piece of the puzzle that I think that we actually just as a collection of people need to look at more.
So architecture originally started as shelter
Yes.
because without shelter, so architecture by itself increases life expectancy compared to being homeless.
Hmm.
But the architecture that we're creating does not maximize life expectancy.
Hmm.
Like I'm looking at buildings that we're creating, I'm going, we're killing people.
Hmm.
We're giving them bad air quality. We're not letting them move their bodies. We're not giving them, encouraging them to stay hydrated. We're not accentuating the things that make people thrive. You
Hmm.
know, they're alive, but they're not thriving,
Right.
and so I'm saying, okay, look, architecture is not done evolving. There's
Mm.
still more. Like, okay, sure. If we start evolving architecture into these things, we'll start seeing average, over the next 100, 200, 300, 500 years, we'll start seeing average life expectancies top out, at three digits.
I
That'll be
wonder.
the average life. Average person
Right.
will live to be 100 years old. And some people will be going to 125.
Yeah.
I predict this, but it's not going to be possible without architecture evolving as well. It's not just medicine that's going to keep us alive.
All right, my dear. Well, this has been quite a fun conversation, and I feel like I've learned a lot, especially the idea of the home being a powerful personal development tool. I think that's something that I'm going to think about more.
I assume that if you hire a designer, you're going to get the style you want. Obviously, we're not going to, if you like mid-century, we're not going to give you traditional or
Right.
rustic, right?
Right.
Or modern, right? We're going to, or postmodern, whatever. We're going to give you something that you like. But having the most best outfit or shoes by your favorite designer in your favorite color, if it's three sizes wrong, well, that's not serving you very well, is it? And,
Right.
and so I want to ask those quality questions and say, who are you? Let's make sure that we provide opportunity for you to have personal growth. Let's make sure that you have the right amount of together time, but also privacy that you may need, space
Mm-hmm.
for yourself, at whatever amount of time that is. Some people want more, some people want less, introverts, extroverts, whatever, but let's just make sure that we ask that of each person who's living there. And what do you do for creative activity and all these things, and say, so we can get sort of uh, a well-rounded picture
Right,
of
that holistic approach, everything.
and once and then we can try to create space there first, sort of this functional level of
Mhm.
things, and then hang the ornamentation on that framework.
Yeah.
And that's really the path to success.
I love that. You've given me a lot to think about that I'm going to digest. Yeah. Which is truly
Well,
appreciated.
good.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Taylor. Thank you so much for sharing. And I wanted to tell you that I love you. God,
Thank you.
Universe, Source loves you. And I
Thank
hope
you.
that you have a wonderful
I
day.
received that and reciprocate.
Oh.